Welcome to the debate. What if the voice in your head right now, the one reading these exact words, sounding out every single syllable, is actually the precise thing preventing you from truly absorbing information?
That is quite the claim.
I mean, it forces us to look in the mirror, right? Today, we are questioning the very mechanics of how we acquire knowledge from text. We're diving into some skimming secrets, looking at the efficacy and, the cognitive implications of speed reading techniques to really boost your English reading speed.
Right. Techniques like skimming, chunking, and structured reading methods.
Exactly. So we are navigating this fundamental tension today. Does optimizing our reading speed through mechanical techniques, like, say, suppressing that internal voice and actively guiding our eyes, does that enhance our ability to process information? Or, conversely, does it fundamentally compromise deep understanding?
Does it reduce the profound act of reading to just superficial gist gathering?
Right. That's the core question. And my perspective is driven by the evidence that our biological hardware is capable of, frankly, far more than we ask of it. By overcoming physical inefficiencies and deeply ingrained, kind of outdated habits, we can unlock vast reading potential. We can process information at high speeds without sacrificing the comprehension we actually need.
And here is where I come at it from a different way. When you speed up that visual processing to its absolute maximum, you invariably lose the internal voice. And that voice, that is the mechanism through which we register tone, nuance, and structural syntax.
You really think that voice is strictly necessary for everything?
I do. Especially looking at this from a cognitive psychology perspective. The core irreducible goal of reading is meaning. It is not a data ingestion race. When we apply these highly mechanical speed hacks, particularly when we are navigating complex vocabulary or confronting entirely novel concepts, we severely risk undermining true understanding.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective.
Go ahead.
To really unpack this, we have to examine the physiological bottlenecks that currently limit the average reader. Because here's the problem. Most of us are still reading with the exact same mechanical habits we learned in, the third grade.
Third grade? I mean, that's a bit harsh.
It's true, though. When we look at a line of text, our eyes do not glide smoothly across the page. They make rapid, jerky movements called saccades, and they pause briefly to focus on specific points, which are called fixations.
Right, the mechanical eye movements.
Yeah, and the source material points out that untrained readers make far too many fixations per line. We process a text word by agonizing word. And worse, we suffer from the habit of subvocalization,
which is sounding out those individual words in our minds.
Exactly. By doing this, you artificially throttle your reading speed to your speaking speed, which is generally around 200 to 250 words per minute. But the visual cortex can process optical information infinitely faster than the vocal cords can simulate speech.
Infinitely faster?
Well, vastly faster. By using techniques like chunking, where we widen our foveal vision to take in groups of 3 or 4 words at a single glance, we bypass those motor limits of speech. We start operating at the speed of sight.
Okay, the mechanics of the eye are certainly fascinating, but you are completely divorcing the visual intake of text from the cognitive processing of meaning.
How so?
Well, you describe subvocalization as an artificial throttle, right? A defect left over from elementary school. I argue that it is the very architecture of comprehension. Let's look at the neuroscience of working memory.
Okay, let's look at it.
When we read, we utilize a subsystem of working memory called the phonological loop. It briefly stores verbal information in an acoustic form. Even the source material explicitly concedes that sounding out words is an incredibly reliable way to ensure you are actually understanding what you are reading.
Sure, it's reliable, but it's not the only way.
But language has rhythm, it has cadence, emphasis, and structural weight. When you eliminate that internal acoustic representation just to prioritize speed, you strip away the contextual nuance.
You're assuming nuance is lost just because it's not heard.
My ultimate question about your chunking technique is this. Does taking in 4 words simultaneously actually allow the brain's semantic network to process their combined meaning? Or does it merely allow the eyes to optically scan the physical page faster? Because seeing a group of words is fundamentally not the same cognitive event as reading them.
That is a fair question. Let me address that with a visual analogy, because I think it illuminates exactly how the brain adapts to chunking.
I'm listening.
Think about how we process a photograph. When you look at an image of a landscape, you don't examine it pixel by pixel, starting at the top left corner and slowly scanning to the bottom right, do you?
Well, no, of course not.
Right. Your visual cortex processes the relationships between the distinct elements simultaneously. You instantly recognize the mountain, the trees, and the river as a cohesive whole.
Okay, but
Let me finish the thought. Reading individual words in sequence is like looking at individual pixels. Meaning rarely resides in a single, isolated word, you know? It emerges from phrases, clauses, and full senses.
I understand the analogy, but
Chunking treats text more like an image. It trains you to expand your foveal vision and utilize your peripheral vision to capture whole semantic blocks. You stop getting bogged down in the syllables and the prepositions, and you start visually processing the overarching idea.
see, the pixel analogy is visually evocative, but it is cognitively flawed.
Flawed how?
Because a photograph is a simultaneous presentation of spatial data. Language, however, is a sequential presentation of logical thought.
They're both just mediums of conveying information.
Yes, but you cannot process a complex philosophical argument or, say, a tightly wound legal statute simultaneously. The syntax itself demands sequence. The meaning of word 5 is entirely contingent on the grammatical constraints established by word 2.
Well, obviously you're moving through the text sequentially, just in larger blocks.
But if you use your peripheral vision to grab block-like chunks of text, you are not actually reading. You are sampling data points. You are grabbing a noun here and a verb there, and your brain is rapidly hallucinating the connective tissue between them based on preconceived expectations. That is highly dangerous when engaging with new material.
Okay, you are assuming that chunking leaves the reader blindly guessing at the structure. But that is only true if you are reading without a framework.
A framework?
Yes, the source material doesn't just tell you to expand your vision and hope for the best. It pairs these mechanical visual optimizations with a highly structured cognitive approach, specifically the PQRST method.
Ah, yes. Preview, question, read, recite, and summarize.
Exactly. This is how we prevent the hallucination you are so worried about. Before you even attempt to chunk the text, you preview the architecture of the document. You look at headings, subheadings, topic sentences.
Okay, but that's just pre-reading.
Then you formulate specific questions. You give your reading a directed purpose. The material notes that a lack of purpose is exactly why readers slow down, lose focus, and regress.
Right.
When you finally execute the read phase using chunking, you are not wandering aimlessly. Your brain is primed to recognize the specific semantic blocks that answer your questions. It transforms reading from a passive, linear reception of every single word into an active, targeted hunt for vital information.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. Let's apply cognitive load theory to that exact method, because there is a massive paradox in presenting PQRST as a tool for efficiency.
A paradox. It's literally designed for efficiency.
Is it? Human working memory has a strictly limited capacity. If you are requiring a reader to actively hold pre-formulated questions in their mind while simultaneously conscious of expanding their foveal vision, while actively suppressing the natural urge to subvocalize, you are maximizing their cognitive load on the mere process of reading.
It takes practice, sure, but it becomes automatic.
You leave virtually no bandwidth for the deep encoding of the actual material. Let's look at the source material's own demonstration. They apply this method to the sentence, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog."
Yes, a classic example.
A simple 9-word sentence. The reader previews it. They formulate a question. What is the main action? They read the chunks. They recite it. They summarize it. They execute 5 distinct, highly deliberate cognitive steps to process 9 elementary words.
Well, it's just meant to illustrate the steps.
And what was the grand conclusion of this exhaustive exercise? The text explicitly states, "I think I got the gist of it." Getting the gist of a 9-word sentence after a 5-step analytical process is not a triumph of cognitive efficiency. And more importantly, getting the gist is an incredibly low bar for adult comprehension.
Okay, I think we have to apply a degree of pragmatism here. The quick brown fox example in the text is purposefully simplistic. It is a micro demonstration designed purely so a beginner can isolate and understand the mechanics of the 5 steps without getting lost in complex material.
Simplistic is an understatement.
But let's scale it up to reality. I actually tried combining these techniques yesterday with a dense 40-page software licensing agreement.
Oh wow, a 40-page agreement.
Yeah, I previewed the sections, asked what my specific liabilities were, and then used chunking to scan the clauses. Yes, I was acquiring the gist of various sections, but in the vast majority of our daily reading, emails, industry reports, news briefings, the gist is exactly the high-level operational understanding we require.
For a licensing agreement, maybe.
If we allocate the deep, sequential, subvocalized reading you are advocating for to every single document we encounter, we would drown in the modern information ecosystem. We simply do not need to mentally pronounce every single preposition to grasp the core argument of a white paper.
Okay, I will certainly concede nuance there. Reading Shakespeare demands a fundamentally different cognitive posture than scanning a software licensing agreement.
Exactly.
If your goal is purely to locate a liability clause, scanning is a valid utility. But my concern arises when these techniques are sold as a holistic replacement for traditional reading, especially when encountering the vocabulary bottleneck mentioned in the material.
The vocabulary bottleneck?
Yes, the text correctly identifies that encountering an unknown word or losing the thread of a complex sentence forces the reader to stop and regress, to move their eyes backward up the page.
Which is a huge waste of time.
The material treats regression as a mechanical failure to be eradicated. I argue that regression is a vital cognitive reflex. It is the brain's error correction system. We don't regress because our eyes are glitching. We regress because our working memory registers that it just missed a critical piece of logical connective tissue.
But that error correction system is often triggered by hyperfixation on localized confusion rather than structural misunderstanding.
I disagree.
Hear me out. The material offers a highly practical, physical solution to break this cycle: metaguiding. This involves using a visual pacer, like dragging a pen or your finger continuously down the page under the text.
Ah, yes, the pen technique.
Like forcing a smooth, unrelenting forward motion, you physically prevent your eyes from regressing. To go back to my experience with that 40-page contract, using my pen to drag my eyes down the page was initially jarring. My hand was actually cramping by page 10.
See? It's completely unnatural.
But that continuous motion broke my deeply ingrained habit of endlessly rereading the same dense legal clauses out of a paranoid anxiety that I hadn't perfectly absorbed a comma. Metaguiding forces you to rely on context clues.
Context clues can only take you so far.
Instead of panicking and regressing at an unknown vocabulary word, the pen pushes you forward. It trains your brain to deduce the meaning from the surrounding chunks of text. It builds reading resilience. It forces the text to submit to your pacing rather than leaving you at the mercy of every difficult syllable.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the cost? Resilience is valuable, sure, but forcefully suppressing your brain's error correction system is perilous.
Perilous? That's a strong word.
It is. If you are reading a complex text in English, which the material notes is heavily nuanced and challenging for those building their proficiency, and you hit a crucial word you do not know, dragging a pen past it does not miraculously teach you the vocabulary.
It's not about miracles. It's about flow.
You are quite literally pointing your way past your own ignorance. Let's think about the compounding nature of errors in reading. If you rely entirely on context clues for an unknown word at high speed, you run a severe risk of misinterpreting the context itself.
But usually, context naturally resolves the ambiguity if you just keep going.
Not always. If you miss a crucial negating word, like a hidden not or rarely, and you use your pen to relentlessly push forward, every subsequent assumption you make about the text gist will be built on a structurally flawed premise.
Well, that's an extreme scenario.
In that scenario, speed reading doesn't make you a better reader. It simply allows you to reach the wrong conclusion much faster. The material clearly states that getting stuck on vocabulary is a reality of reading. Attempting to solve a gap in semantic knowledge by arbitrarily accelerating your physical eye movements is a category error.
It is only a category error if you assume the reader lacks the discipline to eventually look up the core concepts once the initial read-through is complete.
But do they actually go back? Usually no.
Speed. They are about efficiency and momentum. The source material emphasizes that a lack of focused practice is a massive hurdle.
On that, we can agree.
Right? By employing a pen to maintain pace and previewing to build a structural map, you are actively training your focus. You are keeping your brain engaged in the hunt for answers rather than allowing it to passively wander off, which the material highlights as a primary reason people read slowly to begin with. The techniques systematically eliminate the dead space in our reading habits.
They eliminate the dead space, yes, but they also risk eliminating the depth. I think we have to look closely at the underlying philosophy of the material.
What philosophy?
By framing reading primarily as a time management problem to be solved with physical hacks, widening foveal vision, suppressing the internal voice, dragging a pen, it commodifies the act of reading. It treats English texts as raw data to be extracted, rather than ideas to be experienced.
Well, let's synthesize where this leaves us, because I think our respective views actually frame the exact decision every reader has to make when they sit down with a text.
Okay.
Based on the source material, it is pretty evident that we possess the biological capacity to process visual information far faster than our current habits allow.
Sure.
By recognizing subvocalization and excessive regression as mechanical bottlenecks, we can employ chunking and metaguiding to break those habits. And crucially, by wrapping those physical techniques in the cognitive framework of PQRST, we ensure that our newly found speed is directed by clear purpose. We don't have to read every document as if it is sacred literature. We can dynamically adjust our speed to efficiently extract the overarching concepts we need to navigate an information-dense world.
In my concluding synthesis is a warning against treating all text as merely an obstacle to be cleared. While having a clear, directed purpose before you read is undeniably beneficial, we must protect the cognitive depth of the reading process.
Even at the cost of speed.
Especially at the cost of speed. The phonological loop, the internal voice, the instinct to regress when confused, these are not bugs in our biological hardware. They are the features that allow us to grapple with complex syntax and acquire new vocabulary.
I just think it's a balance.
But prioritizing mechanical velocity over the acoustic and structural internalization of language risks leaving us with only the shallowest understanding. We may acquire the gist, but we sacrifice the profound intellectual engagement that deep reading requires.
I hear ya. But despite that fundamental tension, there is a very clear point of convergence here, both between our perspectives and within the source material itself.
Definitely.
We absolutely agree that a lack of practice, reading without a clear strategy, and allowing oneself to be easily distracted by unstructured environments, those are the genuine hurdles holding people back from true literacy and comprehension.
Yes, that is undeniable. The source material is entirely correct to highlight that most of us approach text passively, without any architecture for our attention.
Exactly.
The central debate ultimately rests on whether we build that architecture to optimize our time or to maximize our understanding. Readers must consciously weigh their desire for efficiency against the actual cognitive demands of the text sitting in front of them.
Which means we have to be intentional. We have to decide before we even read the first sentence what our goal actually is. But there is one final provocative implication of this entire discussion that stretches beyond the individual reader.
Oh? What's that?
As millions of people adopt these skimming secrets, as we train ourselves to hunt for the gist and bypass the nuance, we are actually creating a feedback loop that is changing how the English language is written today.
That is perhaps the most profound, unintended consequence of this material. Writers and publishers are acutely aware that their audiences are skimming.
Right. They know we're using the pen.
Exactly. As a result, they are actively optimizing their texts for the meta-guiding pen. We are seeing an explosion of bullet points, heavily bolded keywords, and drastically shortened paragraphs. We are fundamentally flattening the complexity, the rhythm, and the sequential beauty of written thought
to accommodate a society that feels it no longer has the time to subvocalize.
A transformation of language driven by our relentless pursuit of speed. It is a reality every reader and every writer must navigate for themselves.